Hi everybody, I'm Martha with SILCA. Today I have with me a beautiful vintage SILCA pump. This one has been sitting in my coworker's garage for quite some time now, so it has some cobwebs, there are some parts that aren't working quite as they should. So today we're going to restore this pump and bring it back to its former glory. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is remove the top cap from this pump so that I can take a look at what's inside. Now this one is secured into place using 2 screws. Yours may just be threaded in, so you'll need to examine that to determine what tools you need. So I just need a Phillips head, which I have over here. Alright. Alright, so before you remove the top cap, I recommend putting on a pair of gloves. There can be quite a bit of grease built up inside the pump barrel, so it'll make cleanup a lot easier. This top cap, mine will just press out, but it will require quite a bit of force. So I went ahead and loosened it up. Don't be afraid to put some elbow grease into it. You're not going to break it. Alright, there we go. So on the piston rod, you'll likely have something like this spring, and this just protects the leather gasket assembly during the upstroke. We're not going to need to replace that, but we will need to replace everything here on the end. This has just some older components that may have worn out over time, so we're going to go ahead and just clean this off, remove these old parts, and put on the new ones. So the bolt on my piston rod is going to be 17 millimeters. Yours may be a different size, but that's just what I need to remove this. So there we go. Okay, so now that I've got the bolt off, you'll also find underneath that some sort of washer to support the leather gasket. You'll need to take that off as well. There's mine. Take off the old leather gasket. And then you'll have another support washer and a nut. Alright. Now as you can see, this is pretty messy, so I'm going to go ahead and clean it up using a gear wipe, just to make sure we have a clean surface to start with. So now I'm going to remove all my old pieces so I have a clean workbench. They are pretty grimy. Alright, so I have with me a nut washer kit. Now if you order one from our website, what you're going to receive is going to include 3 washers. One of them you will not need. Now this pump is pre-2008, so you're going to need to select the smaller diameter washer. This is going to sit above the leather gasket and support it. So I can set this larger washer aside and not worry about it for this restoration. You're also going to need to pick up a 731 leather gasket. Now they don't come pre-conditioned, so you're going to need to do that now. We recommend using some NFS leather conditioner, but you can also use Vaseline or a high-quality synthetic motor oil. I recommend putting down something underneath the leather gasket so you don't get oil everywhere. But really the goal is to oil it and massage it until you're able to flip the gasket inside out several times. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so now that your leather gasket is conditioned, we can go ahead and begin installing the leather gasket assembly. So the first part of the nut washer kit you're going to want to install is going to be the smaller of the 2 nuts. Now this one, we're just going to go ahead and thread all the way onto the end. You can use a ratchet or a wrench to do this, but you can also just do it finger tight. So there we go. The next thing you're going to put on after this is going to be that washer I showed you earlier. It's the same diameter as your leather washer, so it just sits right above it and offers it a bit of support. All right, so now it's time to install the leather washer. When you're putting this on, make sure you're not forcing it over the threads. See, I'm just threading it into place, and this just makes sure that you don't tear the leather washer and compromise your compression. Okay. All right, so now it's time for the final washer. I'll go ahead and just put that on. And now for the lock nut. Now for this one I am going to use my ratchet just to make sure it's on there really tight. So now that I have it finger tight, I'll go ahead and just, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so now that the leather gasket assembly is secure, we can go ahead and put the piston rod back into the pump barrel. Now when you do this, I recommend guiding the leather gasket in just to ensure that it doesn't crease. So I'm just going to use my fingers to make sure the leather gasket stays intact. And then I'll just re-secure the top cap into place. All right, now that you have your top cap secured into place, whether you just needed to thread it in or use screws, we're ready to move on to the gauge. All right, so now we're going to move on to the bottom portion of the pump. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the gauge. Now this is secured into place sort of like the lid on a pickle jar, so really all you're going to need to do is unthread it from the pump. Again, there may be a bit of grit securing it into place as well, so I do recommend using a wrench for this. Mine would take a 14 millimeter. There's a little bolt embedded into the underside of the gauge, so you're just going to take your wrench and use it to remove the gauge that way. Okay, so now that I've loosened it up, I can just use my hand to unthread it the rest of the way. There we go. So I've assessed this pump, and I've noted that really this is my only opportunity to access the check valve and the hose. So while the gauge is off, we'll go ahead and do the new check valve installation as well as install the new hose. All right, so now that I have the gauge removed, this is really the best opportunity for me to replace the check valve. This might not be the case for your pump, but if you look at this one, this is really the only opportunity I have to access the check valve assembly. So at this point, I'll go ahead and remove this bolt. This one's going to take a 14 millimeter wrench. Again, it might require quite a bit of force to remove this, as it will get quite a bit of buildup over time. Okay. All right, so I've removed the bolt as well as the old crush washer. We're going to replace this crush washer, so you can go ahead and take this off. The check valve did not come out with the bolt, so I'm going to need to see if I can just wiggle it out. All right, there we go. So I have the old check valve here. I can set that aside and install the new one. So the new kit you have is going to come with a replacement crush washer as well as the check valve assembly. So you can go ahead and just secure the check valve and crush washer into place. All right, once you have it set up, you can go ahead and just install it just like you got it out. And when you reinstall it, you're going to want to make sure you get this bolt really tight so that the crush washer is activated. Okay. So now that I have it finger tight, I'm going to go ahead and come in with my wrench just to make sure the crush washer is really crushed. All right, now that the inner check valve assembly is installed, we're going to move on to the new hose. Now, to remove the hose clamp, you'll probably need a pair of pliers. I have some needle nose pliers here, so I'll go ahead and remove the hose clamp so that then I can get the old hose off the hose barb. There we go. Now, it's likely yours is going to be installed on there pretty good as well, so don't be surprised if you have to use quite a bit of force. All right, now it's time to install the new hose. So your kit's going to come with a new hose, of course, as well as 2 Oetiker clamps. Now one of these hose clamps is going to go on the side that's connected to the pump. I'm going to go ahead and secure that into place. And then the other one is going to go on the other end for your chuck. All right, so a trick to making this go on a little bit easier is to take some lubricant and put it right inside the hose. I'm going to use some NFS. You could also use Synergetic or a bit of Vaseline. And then you should just be able to put it onto the hose barb pretty easily. Okay, see, there we go. And once that's installed, you'll just shimmy the hose clamp down so that it's over the hose barb. So ideally you would use an Oetiker clamp for this, but you can also use a pair of wire cutters. I have some over here. Now the trick for this, with an Oetiker clamp you could clamp the whole thing at once, but for this you'll need to do each side. So I'll do a pinch on that side, and then I'll flip it around and pinch the other side. So I'll do that now. Alright, so now that my hose is clamped into place, it's time for me to reinstall my gauge. Now your new gauge is going to come with 2 crush washers. Technically you only have to use one, but the second one will give you just a little bit of extra height. So for this pump I'm going to go ahead and use both of them. So just go ahead and take your crush washers, slide them over the threaded portion of the gauge, and then you can just hand tighten it first and then come in again with your wrench to make sure that it's really tight. Okay, so again I'm going to use a 14mm for this. And you want to secure it so that when you're pumping and looking down at the pump, it's right side up. So keep that in mind. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so the last step for us is going to be installing a new chuck. So the way that you're going to need to set this up is you're going to need to install a threaded Schrader chuck first, and then you'll be able to install either of our modern Presta-Chucks. So I have my thread-on Schrader chuck here, and again I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit of lubricant inside the hose just to make it a little bit easier for me. Alright, so now I'm just going to secure it into place. There we go. Now if you don't use lubricant, this can be pretty difficult, so I do recommend that. And now I'm just going to scoot the hose clamp so that it's over the hose barb. Great. Now I can just use my clamps to get the Oetiker clamp secured. So now that we have the hose clamp secured, I can go ahead and install my Presta-Chuck. Now you have 2 options here. You can either do the Hero side locking Presta-Chuck, or you can do the press-on Presta-Chuck. Now today I'm going to do the Hero chuck. I have mine right here. And to install it for either chuck, all you need to do is just thread it right into the Schrader. It's that easy. There we go. So now I've installed all the replacement parts on this pump. So the next step is just going to be a quick test to make sure everything is functioning well. I want to make sure my gauge is working well. I want to make sure I have good compression and that there are no leaks. So the best way to do that is to just cover up the chuck with your thumb and give it a few pumps. Alright, so I can see that my gauge is activating. I don't hear any leaks, and I'm getting really good compression. Perfect. Alright, so that's how you restore a vintage SILCA pump. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any suggestions for a future video or any comments on this one, please leave them in the comment section below.